Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on the Unraveler Show with my good friend Rick Welch as we continue our series Bondar and Welch. Rick, how you doing tonight or
I'm
today?
good. Yeah, I'm good, man. You've changed your music.
I did. I had to do that. I found out that the music I was using had this copyright slash non-monetization
Wow.
problem. And I was really sad about that because I really liked the music. And then I found another one that I thought was, good because I did the research, at least I thought I did. And then I was like, oh, yeah, and I found this one and I revamped the whole thing. It turned out that one was also a problem. So then I had to find this one. Anyway, it turns out this one is clear. And I've checked
And
with
now you can monetize the piss out of this one.
and now I can monetize it because when you become famous and rich, you're going to be able to. People are going to research this and find us, and they're going to be like, "Oh my goodness, Rick
There it is.
Welch on the Unravel Show," and then I'll get monetized, and then I'll be rich because you were on the show. So,
Finally.
yeah,
Finally.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
that desire to be rich. We're always looking for it. Hey,
yes,
can
yes.
I thank you? I want to thank you for something. I know it's been a while, and I just want to tell your audience how gracious you've been to me. I've had a lot of death that surrounded me between family and friends. And I reached out to you and I was like, look, man, this is tough. And you're like, take some time off for mental health. So thank you for doing that. Then I spoke in Montana. So I was trying to prepare for that. And I got back. And then another friend passed away of cancer. So it's just been a roller coaster. But I appreciate you being so kind and reaching out to me and understanding. It means a lot to me. So thanks, man.
Well, you're welcome, and I appreciate that. Sadly, here you come right off the cuff of that, and I'm going to try to kill God. So I mean, this.
Yeah. I mean, I know what your book was titled.
Yeah, well, it's still titled that now because
It's
the second edition is not finished yet.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
but yeah, I'm still waiting for you to actually give me your feedback on that. So we'll get there.
Well,
So
you keep sending me new ones. Like I keep
no,
getting like,
no, no, no. That's it. You the version there is just read it. Just it's there.
okay,
It's there.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
no.
I
The
am.
online.
I am actually. I
Yeah.
am.
Although I've gotten some good feedback recently, and I need to make a couple more adjustments. That's why I'm waiting. It's why it's not come out yet because I'm getting all the best possible feedback I can, both from Christians, non-Christians, from theists, atheists, from agnostics, and the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
So I'm really getting as much feedback as I can, and genuinely making adjustments because I want this book to be not only as powerful as it can be, but honest
Hmm.
in dealing with people's different perspectives. Um, so it's still a work in progress, but it's getting there. It's getting
Yeah.
close. It's getting close.
It's one of the things I love about you is that you're brutally honest. You just are. You're just freaking brutally honest. I love that. I
Well,
think
I
it's good.
appreciate that. Well, I mean, I also appreciate your brutal honesty about some of the things too in the book, especially the title. I mean, as I said, you were like basically the straw that broke the camel's back. It was like we got to a point where I was like, I got to change this title because it's clearly not being as effective as it could have been. So
Yes. And can I also say real quick before we get started, I want to apologize to you and the audience as well. My internet service here, I'm on Starlink, and right now it's been really spotty. So I might freeze up here and there. Just be patient with me. It will come back. Just give it a minute. Okay.
thanks for saying that. So far you're good. You've been good for the last like 5 minutes, so I think we're okay.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
so, all right. So here we go. The type of conversation we're having is really really good, and I think it's important for audiences to see an atheist and a theist both have these conversations together and dialogue about these things. It has the potential to destroy a friendship if you're not careful.
It
Clearly,
does.
if you don't respect the other person and be able to digest what they're saying um, and so we're going to continuously walk that fine line, especially as we start to get deeper and deeper into this discussion, and I start to bring in what we're going to bring in today. We're going to be dealing with some difficult texts. I obviously think that God is a pedophile, a rapist, a murderer, an enslaver. I think all these horrible things about God. I think he's completely immoral, and that's what I'm going to try to demonstrate through the text today. You obviously do not think that.
Hmm.
You want to protect this God and demonstrate that he's none of those things, in spite of the fact that these verses do, in fact, teach these elements. So it's going to be a challenging day today, so to speak, in that regard. Um, so so we got to tread carefully here as we talk. But I also want to make sure that neither one of us holds back from sharing our genuine perspectives on these things, because then we don't actually move the conversation forward. So
Hmm.
we got to be able to do that, and yet do it in a lighthearted and friendly manner. Um,
Yeah,
I
we need to talk about rape and murder in a very lighthearted and friendly
yeah,
manner.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Right?
Right,
Here
right.
we go.
Yeah, yeah. Here we go. Right. Let's do that. So, Rick, I'm going to ask you this question publicly, um, I think if I recall our conversations, and I want to make sure you have a chance to respond so that I'm not misquoting you, but if I recall correctly, you had said that if in fact the Bible does teach that God endorses rape, murder, pedophilia, and slavery, that would be the line for you.
Yes. Yeah. And knowing that I'm saying that out loud, um, it creates anybody that's ever been in the position that I'm in with you right now, then I'll just go ahead and describe what it feels like. It's a very palpable feeling to say that out loud. It feels risky by saying something like that because ultimately what I'm doing is I'm putting my faith to the ultimate test, and I'm saying, is what I believe real? And if this is real, what am I saying that I'm willing to accept by saying that it's real? And so when you brought those questions to me at first, and I'm reading them and I'm using my modern lens mind and I'm saying yes, 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 no, at the end, I knew what I was doing when I was answering those questions initially. But um, I made that determination before I even entered into this debate. I thought debates bore me. I don't know if they bore you. When I watch debates, I feel like it's an echo chamber. A lot of times people are just saying what they want to say and then they walk away and they don't change. I don't want to get into a debate unless I feel like there's going to be something positive about it. And we're not really debating. We're just discussing. We're not versus each other. We're just openly discussing it. But this is, yeah, it's a very real feeling, like it's guttural because, I've staked my life on this since I was 10 years old. And so here we are. I was on the burros and went from being a futurist dispensationalist to becoming a full preterist. That was a big change for me. It was huge just because of reading the text itself. So here we are. We're still reading the text and we're looking at it in a different light, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a real thing. And I actually had a question that I wanted to ask you too. I don't know if now's the right time, but I think since we're right at the top, maybe I could. I wrote it down. It was something that I thought about whenever I was in Montana. Um, is it okay if I ask you that question and you just jump all over me?
Sure. Yeah. Let's go. Right on.
Something that's in your book. It's a powerful thing in your book, and it's about how we use a psychological coping mechanism. We call it faith. We're psychologically we're using it as a coping mechanism. We're being brainwashed into believing in something that doesn't exist. We're being, like you say in your opening thing, we're being called a maggot. We're a menstrual rag. Nothing that we do is good. So psychologically, we're already being pummeled by that. And then when we come to this faith and then we're accepted, then it becomes almost like endorphins or an addiction when you finally get that nicotine or whatever it is, that feeling. Um, so I wrote this question about proving things. Can you prove that your rejection of God is not itself a psychological coping mechanism, a reaction to negative experiences with religion, or a desire for moral autonomy disguised as rationality? Do you know what I mean?
I mean, essentially, I think if I were to summarize your question, can I prove that what I'm doing is not just another form of brainwashing?
Kind of, yeah. Like that. Like I'm asking about when I say, can you prove that your rejection of God is not itself? I'm saying that in the way that I'm accepting God based on this information, can it be the same for you on the opposite end of the spectrum by rejecting it? And um, it being a reaction to the negative experiences that you've had with religion, or the negative experiences, or perhaps the desire to be moral, to have your autonomous morality from it. And I'm not saying, oh, Alan, you want freedom to be immoral. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that could you be dealing with what you had psychologically in the negative, like I did what I consider the positive, which you see as the negative? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So the way that I would respond to that is, um, atheism isn't a position you take on something. It isn't a response to something. It isn't uh, a reaction to experiences you've had in life. Atheism is simply the um, default position that you have when you don't actually believe in a God or in the supernatural or something of that sort. So, becoming an atheist, it wasn't like I left Christianity to run to something
Hmm.
or even run away from something. It wasn't anything like that. I'm an atheist not because I desire to believe a certain thing or not believe a certain thing. I'm an atheist not because I was damaged or hurt or because somebody hurt my feelings or I wanted to live a version of morality that Christianity couldn't let me live. It was nothing like that. Um, I basically just settled into the default position that you have, that everybody has prior to embracing theism. Um, there are other positions that I may hold now after several years of being an atheist in that default position where um, where I've started to rebuild my worldview, such as humanism, for example. Um, my strong belief that science is the best method we have currently to determine reality. Um, Hedonism, not Christian hedonism, but just hedonism, which interestingly enough, I brought that whole theology with me. I
Hmm.
just dropped the Christian part and I still maintain the hedonism part. I just found that God is not necessary to be a hedonist and a good hedonist to bring about the greatest benefit to people as you possibly can, without it harming your own joy and happiness. Um, so I would honestly say that it is not the same because atheism isn't the worldview. There are other things that I have developed that have become my worldview since being an atheist. But when I left Christianity, I didn't become an atheist in response to anything. I
Hmm.
just one day said, this just isn't real. And it was as
Hmm.
simple as that. I didn't leave Christianity because the church hurt me. Not my particular church. My particular church, they were always good to me. But previous churches or whatever. Had that been the case, I'd have left Christianity years earlier, but I didn't. I continued to fight against that and be like, no, God is still glorious, in spite of all of that. Um, I also, didn't leave Christianity because I wanted to live some immoral lifestyle or anything like that. Like I said, that wasn't some drive for me to leave Christianity. In fact, when I was a Christian, I believed I could have done that anyway and still remained a Christian, and knew it was sin, but also was comfortable saying there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So I would have been like, God's all right with me living in sin for a bit to get it out of my system if I have to. And then, but I'm still a Christian and he's good with that. I still held to that because I believe once saved, always saved. That was my particular theology. So there was no real motivation for me to leave Christianity other than I just didn't believe it anymore. I lost
Hmm.
all reason to have what you would call faith. Um, so I just don't think faith is a method by which we can test reality. Um, as I define in my book, faith is the evidence that you have. It is not faith plus evidence. There's no such thing as faith plus evidence because once you have evidence, good evidence anyway, of a certain thing, you no longer need faith. You just have the evidence. And so you just believe, you just trust it. And you're just like, hey, evidence, there it is. I don't have faith that gravity exists. I just know it does, which is why I'm not going to jump off the Empire State Building. But faith is the evidence itself because it doesn't have any other evidence substantiating it. So I don't think faith is a good method by which to test anything. I do think science is. And that is what happened to me. And that's the long and short of it all. There was no other motivating factor whatsoever. So I can honestly say, to your question, no, it is not the same factor whatsoever that drives me as what it is that drives you.
Right. Yeah. And would you say that, so let's say atheism aside, based on the definition that you just gave for it, these other worldviews, can they form out of the same thing that my Christianity can form from? Can it be through trauma? Can it be through these other forms, much like Christianity does? Can these other worldviews develop from the same core principles that Christianity does?
I don't think so. And the reason why is because things that are um, things that are demonstrated scientifically are peer reviewed,
Hmm.
and they're tested repetitively or repeatedly. Sorry, um, and so it's not just feelings. It's not just faith. It's not just I can't explain it any other way, so it has to be God. There isn't anything like that. So while an individual might just randomly jump to it and say, well, I'm just going to believe this because that hurt me, trauma or whatever. So, sure, I suppose an individual can fall into that trap. But the difference is um, there are validating and verifying reasons why scientific and empirical things are something you can trust and depend on because they're proven. They're tested. There's something that are in the natural realm that anybody can see and verify for themselves. When it comes to faith, you can't. It's just if you're hurt or traumatized, you're driven to it because it just makes you feel good. Um,
Hmm.
so that would be a major difference for me, in my opinion. I don't think you can demonstrate the anything that is lived for by faith, while you can demonstrate things that are verified in the natural realm. Um, so yeah, I don't think trauma is a driving factor for the things that for the worldviews that are built upon in the natural realm. Whereas I do think trauma can very much cause that in the faith realm more so, and hold on to you um, because people are afraid, I think, to to abandon what makes them feel good,
Hmm.
to a degree where even if they can't explain it, they're just going to believe it. Um, and I personally, as much trauma as I have been through, and I have been through quite a bit,
Hmm.
and it was very painful to get through all the stuff that I went through. But interestingly, I never left Christianity when I was in my trauma. I
Hmm.
didn't leave Christianity when I was going through therapy, when I was in my depression. I held on to it with all of my might. It wasn't until I came through all of that and was really on the healing side after therapy that I just kind of woke up, which is really fascinating. It wasn't until I was in my right mind, so to speak, that I said, huh, this just doesn't add up.
Hmm. Yeah. I don't think I think I did explain it on this on the first one or two episodes, was that I had somewhat of the opposite effect where I was in Christianity and was still a mess, and then I went through secular therapy. And then as I went through secular therapy, my therapist used what I had already introduced to him, which was my faith and, a Christian background, a Christian faith. He used that in my therapy and didn't stray from it. And I found out that's a common thing they do in cognitive behavioral therapy. If it's a strong thing in your life and it's a priority, they don't try to tell you to negate that. They try to utilize that, but bring you to a healthy position. So when I got into this position of where, where I thought I was healthy, I wasn't as angry as I was all the time. My faith became stronger, but only in the sense that I began to see that a lot of the things that he was teaching me in my therapy that I was able to see and verify also in the Bible. And I thought, well, that's interesting. This is an ancient book. How is it so relevant? And so that was powerful for me, it just ingrained it even further. But dealing with Bondar book, all the things that came to mind, you really made me, forced me to stop and really answer the question, you know, how do I prove the existence of God. And my answer has always been from day one, I can't, I do not and cannot. And getting into some sort of a logical argument about it doesn't prove his existence either. The only proof that I've ever been able to offer is what I say are my personal experiences. But by doing that, I set myself up for a disaster when I talk to everybody else. The guy that believes in the flying spaghetti monster has similar experiences, and then they look at me and say, well, why is mine not real? And I say, I can't say anything because I know that feeling. I'm doing that myself, you know. And so when I've talked to other Christians, you know, about this, I mean, they all feel like, well, Rick, you know, you really gotta lay the base, you know, got to show. Well, no, I really don't. I don't feel like I need to lay the base. I think that I think I've stated that I had this moment in my heart where something began to indwell and change me from within. I was wrestling with specific details about my reality and started not hearing an audible voice, but just started hearing things that were challenging me the way that I thought of my reality, and started engaging my reality differently. And every time I did that, it built. It was like a foundation that started, and then it just built, 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 built. And then it became rationally to me a person. It became a person, you know. And some might say, well, you know, you created a fake invisible friend, Rick, is what you've done. And it's like, well, you know, I get it. Because you can't see him and neither can I. So you can say it that way. All I'm saying is that my personal experience, it jacked into my reality and it shifted my reality. And so I started looking at it. In your book, what it marvelously does is it strips away what is brainwashing in the church. It strips away what is the addictive part of our personality, and of which I do have some of that in me, which I think is brilliant, you know. But the thing that is, it feels like, what is the word? Betrayal. I feel like I'm betraying my own life experiences of dealing with what I'm saying is God, is Christ in me, by eliminating him and saying, no, that's not Christ. That's Rick. That's Rick doing that. And I'm saying, well, it can't be, because these are his words, and these are, you know, it's this stuff is welling up. How do I define that for you? You know, like, this is stuff that's happening internally in my mind. I'm feeling it much like I am even in your argument, you know, with the palpable feeling of, oh, we're at risk. You know, it's very similar. It's like this thing that's happening on the inside. And then I'm making these decisions that are based on it. And these decisions that I'm making, I'm thinking about these words that are constantly flowing in me. So when I say, you know, like, if you wanted to ask me any tough questions about God, you know, if I say, well, God is love, and you're like, no, God's not love because of X, Y, and Z, I tell you, my experience is that God is love. Like, that's what I'm trying to tell you, you know, like, this is the experience that I have. Yeah, but Rick, Yahweh is not. Look at this. This is Yahweh, and Jesus is Yahweh. Therefore, God can't be good. Therefore, whatever you're defining as your experience is false. And I'm saying, God is love. You know, the frustrating part of that is that I'm trying to define it just based on experience, not based on just words, you know, just those words, you know, that are in the Bible. So that makes it difficult. And also, you know, I've told you in this debate so far that you've even said it actually to me, like, Rick, you don't sound like a Christian. Like, it doesn't sound like you're a Christian. You sound like something totally different. And I'm like, okay, like, I get it. But all of those core things that I'm talking about are like in Christ's words. And so that I can't betray myself to that. Like, I'm like, these are Christ's words, or things that Paul defined as fruits of the Spirit or whatever, you know. I'm reading those words and I'm like, oh yes, I recognize that. I recognize that in me. So that's the struggle, I think, for me, is that it would be a betrayal of who I am at the core of my being. And, you know, never really had been challenged on that, you know, because I was always in echo chambers and circles that believed similar. I mean, we didn't necessarily believe exactly the same, but we believed in the same God, you know, whereas I'm talking to you and you're like, no, You know, it's different.
I did believe in the same God though.
Yeah, and you
and, and
did.
and I got you beat. I believe in him since birth.
I
I
know.
never
I
knew any
mean,
different, so um
yeah, for
so
sure.
me getting out of that was just it's still mind blowing to me. I still sometimes can't believe where I'm at. I'm just like, holy cow! It's utterly shocking. Um, you would 10 years ago, there's no way in hell you would have heard me say, maybe someday I'll try atheism like that. That just wasn't an option. I would have
No, I
said,
mean,
I would have said, if the truth ends up being that God doesn't exist, that's where I'm going to go. But I never for a second believed that was even remotely possible. Um,
yeah, I
but
mean, like that's where like the mercy, the forgiveness, the the ability to love um something that doesn't want to be loved, to be able to look at somebody that literally hates you and to feel that well up inside, like ready to just lay down if that's what it takes to get this person to see that um that this love that I have inside me, it look, I'm not going to lie to you. Like I get a lot of criticism from inside all of these camps these circles that I'm in about my pacifism. Like I don't believe that the church should be violent, like ever. I don't believe that we should be involved in wars. And people argue with me. Well, are you trying to take away my guns and stuff? And I'm like, look, man, like I understand why you're saying what you're saying. I'm just saying I don't like that doesn't jive with me. Like what I'm seeing is a very sacrificial thing, and um, I don't see the necessity of turning countries into parking lots because my God is better than yours or bigger than yours, or this is how we maintain peace. It's like I don't see any of that in any of the words that Jesus said, and I'm like, and all of the men that, if they truly did write the New Testament, they all went to their deaths, without fighting back. I mean, that's what they did. Now, maybe John, maybe not, but historically speaking, that's what they say.
so that's an interesting comment you just made. You said if they wrote the New Testament.
Yes.
That's not an admission you usually hear from anybody that's a Christian.
Mhm.
Typically, it's just definitive they wrote the New Testament. So it's odd to me that you embrace so deeply the words of Jesus in your life and how things have played out without the certainty that these men actually wrote that the original authors actually even wrote the Bible or the New Testament. So
Mhm.
this Jesus, for all intents and purposes, could have just even been made up. And even if some dude named Jesus existed, the legend version of him could have also been made up. And you seemingly willing to recognize that you'd have to admit that's a possibility. So if that's true, and you aren't definitive that these are the words of Jesus, and yet you're basing your entire life on this possibility, something you're not even certain of, that is an odd way to live, it seems to me, to bank your experiences on these words of Jesus. Ray and I just started reading the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Yeah.
I never read it before, go figure.
Do me a favor. Tell Ray that I speak both Mars and
Oh, you
Venusian.
do. Oh, that's good to know.
I tell
And
Holly that all the time. I speak both.
we need to hang out more because I apparently suck at Venetian. So um, I need to really I need to really work on that. But my therapist recommended it, so we're like, okay, let's read it. We'll try to see if we can things out. So we're going to read this book, and much like other books, I'm going to apply things from the book to my life, and they're probably going to change things and make things for the better. Um, and so that book is going to certainly impact me because I read words on a page. I put those words in practice, and it just so happens that those words will impact my life, hopefully positively. It could be negative, but I am assuming positive. Um, in the same way, you've taken words on a page, you decided to do something with them, and it just so happened to produce effects. But there's no absolute correlation that you can say is definitive between your actions and these words on their page. they literally could just as well be coincidence that what you did just actually is good to do, and they bring about positive benefits, especially since you're not even sure this Jesus is real.
The other side of that coin is that, you also have to take into account the things that were there prior to understanding and knowing the words. So once the experience begins, and then you read the words and you're like, oh, well, that explains it, like you reading it after the fact. There's these aspects of, for example, I'll just give you an example, and let me say it this way. Read The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. I also told Holly that I spoke all 5 love languages fluently on our first date.
Wow, you're a liar, bro.
I was a liar, and the truth wasn't in me.
Did whatever you could to get her, huh?
And I'm glad, and I got her.
Yeah, you did. That worked.
So the real question is lying bad? No. No.
Hey, but I'm all for it. Depends on the circumstances. Yeah, I don't have any guilt and conscience about it anymore. I'm not a Christian, so this is perfect. So great for you, man.
So, okay. So whenever I became a Christian, I didn't know what the works of the flesh were. I didn't know what the fruits of the Spirit were. I didn't know what that was. I heard this thing about love, and I responded to it, and that's where I began to believe in this Jesus, and that I didn't even know him as God when I first started as a child. I didn't have all of those things, but as I got older and I started recognizing those things that the Bible was saying, that what the works of the flesh were, like what those things were in me that was wrestling. And then this other side, it was a wonderful introduction as to what was actually happening on the inside. Now, was that 100%? No, it was probably 30%, let's say, like, of the things that I was dealing with later on. Some of the words I read and then put them into practice. Some of the things I was already practicing and then found them in the word, right? I'd say it was a 70-30. 30 being the stuff that I was actually doing prior to being educated on it. So when I say words like whoever wrote the Bible, I mean, there's a lot of questions within Christianity about what books should be in the Bible, what, who wrote what, which ones are Pauline, which ones aren't. I just always remember the fact that the church didn't have the New Testament for like 300 plus years. I mean, they were operating what I consider by the Spirit up until that point. And I think that a remnant of people from that point all the way up to here have also been living by the Spirit. Yes, I think that the Bible is inspired. But is it, do I have to put down with certainty exactly how it came to be and who did it? Not necessarily. I'm not, like, when you say, like, you're weighing your whole life on this, and I'm asking, like, which part? Like, what do you mean I'm weighing my whole life on it? Like, I live my life just like anybody else does. I have to go to work and I have to provide, and I have to clean my house when I don't want to because my wife says so. And then I have to, I'm living my life as far as, holding my whole life to what? Just being, I guess, just by being a Christian, like believing in Jesus, that there's a mandate, perhaps. Is that what you mean? Like, I have a mandate upon my life, that I have things that I have to do. And because, I don't necessarily feel that. I don't feel a mandate upon me. I just feel a natural flow that comes through me. And, that's, I don't have like this, I don't feel that, like, this overwhelming, like, weight, on me. You know what I mean?
So there are certainly things that you would consider sin that you're not allowed to do, and if you did them, then they would be considered unholy, right?
Yeah, like adultery, for example.
Right.
Yes.
And so you would believe that you dishonored a God and did something immoral or evil by that. That affects you.
Well, I would actually believe that I dishonored my wife.
Okay,
so I see what you're saying.
Okay.
I think that God being love, God is instructing us on how to relate, how to be to relate. When I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far, but I want to say it like this. And you'll, being a former Christian, you should be able to see this. So if we go back to the garden really early when Adam was with God and he had no woman, remember that? And it said that man was alone, that it wasn't good that he was alone. We Christians never talk about the fact that God was with Adam, but Adam, that wasn't enough. Because if that had been perfect, like if that relationship right there had been perfect, then end of story, right? Man was alone. There was something wrong. Like he needed this relationship. So God being a relationship God, what I consider to be putting the image on mankind was the male and female relationship and the ability to make a family. And then that mingled with dominion together is what created the image. That's what made the image bearer. So whenever I think about adultery, like, am I committing adultery against God when I do adultery against my wife? Well, ultimately, he does not want me to do this to my wife in our relationship. So I see that more as dishonoring my wife and breaking that down. I don't see him like beating me with a hammer because
Well,
you see what I mean?
okay, so the question is, what do you need God for then? What is the benefit to holding on to God when you can just do these same things and have these same morals that I have?
Yeah, well, because my moral framework started from this perspective. It
So
didn't. It
you're
was.
telling me you would not have been able to know that it's hurting your wife to commit adultery unless you had God first tell you that?
I mean, maybe not. I mean, can I just say it this way? I mean, I've had, members of my personal family that I've watched commit this kind of atrocity towards their wife and not have any type of feeling sorry at all, but which shocks me. And I'm like, why not? That's awful. You shouldn't do that. Um, I've seen Christians that love to go to like a bachelor party where they're going to a strip club and they see absolutely nothing wrong with it whatsoever. Right. It's like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I see people that are capable of not feeling guilt for that kind of thing. And for me, like, to me, it's like, I don't know. I can't answer that question because my moral framework initiates with the words of God in my heart. Like
So the
that's where
strip club thing's a great thing to camp out here for just a second. You believe that there is a moral obligation based on the Bible that makes that wrong, correct?
well, yeah, yes, but I also it stems from me from within, and I agree with the Bible with what it says in regard to it.
Okay, so
Yes.
you're dictating what you think is okay first, and you're accepting the Bible because it's a standard you're okay with.
Yeah, it's kind of a backwards way of looking at it, but because I
Totally backwards,
see
because
that
that's not a transcendent standard then anymore. That's your standard, and you've
it's my
just
standard,
added.
right? But
Right.
my
So
standard, but I'm saying that from within this standard, that when you say it's transcendent, okay, if I'm telling you that this is coming from within, I've got a side of me that wants to go look at naked women in a bar, and then I have a side of me that says that's dishonoring your wife, then these things, which wins, right? And then when I look at the scriptures and I see that this is what it says, I'm like, okay, that testifies that the spirit that's operating within me is arguing with the flesh that wants to do the thing.
okay, but let's say you're in a relationship with a spouse that's totally okay with it.
Hmm.
Now what do you do?
That's a great question. I've never thought of it that way. I don't know that I would want to be with a spouse like that
Why?
because I don't, what, that's okay with me just doing whatever?
Yeah, why? I mean, no, we specifically talking about going to a strip club.
Yeah, I don't,
Why would that be a problem if you're in a relationship with somebody that is okay with that?
yeah, because it's not okay.
It's not okay. Why?
Because it's not, I mean, it's not, again, like from within for me, like it's not okay for me to look upon someone else with that type of lust in order for me to feel like I'm relating properly in this relationship. On my side, if you think that it's okay, that's on you, but I have to question my relationship with you now because therefore, what do you think? Like, do you think it's okay to go and look at all these other things too and want me to be okay with it, of which I'm not? So now we're talking about the relationship standards.
All right. So no longer are you saying that the Bible is the ultimate authority. You're saying Rick Welch is the ultimate authority.
No, that's not what I said. I'm
Okay.
saying that what I'm saying is that I attest, like once that comes up in me and I'm thinking that I'm wrestling with the two things that are going on. And then when I see in the scriptures that, I'm like, yes, I see that is a standard that God has set. I can understand why I agree with that on the inside and why this is trying to fight with it. And so I say, I want to follow that because that brings me more joy. It brings me more peace and it makes my life better. That's how I see it.
No, sure, but you're saying that because you think that that's the best way and the only right way, that therefore you're going to follow this standard that you've dictated is an okay standard, but somebody else's standard is no longer okay. So Rick Welch has become the dictator of all standards. You think
It
somebody is wrong for doing this and going to a strip club if they're married or whatever, or maybe you even think it's wrong if you're not married. I don't know where you stand on that. I'm assuming that would be the case for you too, but there is nothing immoral about that whatsoever. It's just Rick Welch has decided that it is.
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying that there, well, let's start here. You think there's nothing immoral about going to a strip club? Is that what you mean?
I mean, what like when now we're talking about morality and what defines morality? Is it some objective transcendent standard, or is it Rick Welch's personal subjective standard? Because this is the problem: is you are deciding one standard, I'm suggesting an alternative standard,
Mm-hmm.
and you're saying you like the standard of the Bible, and then you're going to say the Bible is the objective standard. But
Yes.
what if I
Okay.
don't agree with you that the Bible is the objective standard? I have a different standard.
That's
Who
fine.
decides morality?
So do you remember when I said earlier it feels like a betrayal? Remember when I said it feels like I'm betraying something?
Yeah.
Okay. I just said you've got two things operating simultaneously. Okay. I've got a side of me that feels lust, that wants to engage, wants to see that, that to go to that strip club or to become inebriated and have this, to do all the things, right? To be able to do what it is that I want to do. Now, I could set that standard apart from this. I could set that as my standard. That's my moral standard. I can do whatever I want. And therefore, that's my moral standard. Now, on the other hand, I have this other thing that's operating that is it's operating kind of like the way, remember me when I used to talk about Freud before, like the id ego and superego, the argument that's inside the man, right? So what I'm saying is that I've got this other thing that's on the inside that is telling me what everything that's going to happen if I decide to let this be okay, like this is what I'm going to do, this is what's happening. And then I'm like, okay, I'm choosing this one because I like the outcome, right? And then I look at the word of God and I see also, oh, okay, I see this because this is not how I love someone, whether it's my wife or even the person that may be okay with stripping and doing whatever, but I see that as something that could be harmful. Then that's that's how I'm making this decision. But I have a side of me that wants to do all the things, right? And then a side of me that talks to me and lets me know this is not what you do, that. So by me stating that, I'm not forcing my morality upon anyone else. I'm forcing that upon myself. That's the decision that I'm making for myself, right?
Okay. So according to Rick Welch and your standard of morality, is there ever a time, is there ever a circumstance, according to you and according to the Bible, because that's your standard that you agree with, where it would be okay for a married man to go to a strip club?
As to enjoy it or to go and save somebody in it. You see what I mean? Like, what do you
No,
mean?
to enjoy it. Yeah, to do it, to go and enjoy a strip club.
No,
Or
not a married man.
let's switch to something even more easy. Pornography. Would there ever be a good time, like any circumstance whatsoever, where a married man should be looking at pornography in your position?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
So, do you think that um, the Bible would ever condone a time, any circumstance, where it would be okay for a man to go and look at pornography when they're married?
So if we look at it from the Old Testament perspective, when you look at it in time, in particular time, there are moments when I believe that I don't think he's saying this is good. I think that he's injecting certain aspects of covenantal life into something. So, in other words, like if we bring up, well, it would just really depend. It would depend on if it was wartime, in this particular, whatever that instance is that he's bringing it up. It is, in my opinion, it's lessening whatever the evil was of its time. So if am I making any sense?
So you would
I guess I need the example. Give me the
okay,
example.
I'm getting there. So according to you, then you're almost changing what you said. There are circumstances in which you would say that it is okay to condone a man looking at pornography. One of those circumstances might be wartime or
No,
whatever the circumstances are.
that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in time, we have to, if we make this time, we are post Christ now. So I'm answering post Christ, operating by the Spirit. I'm using this. I'm not talking about the temporary injunction of the law in the world or prior to that, where you're dealing with, cultures that are doing like atrocities towards one another.
But I am talking about that. That's my concern. Is I asked you, is there ever a circumstance or a time when that would be okay to condone? And you said no. And then I said, and then you took it, and then I said, okay, would it be okay under a war circumstance for God to condone it simply because that's what the society was doing at the time?
So you're going to have to give me the example because we're talking on a wide spectrum here.
All right, well, let's get to something very specific. Let's completely abandon the whole pornography woman thing because I'm trying to parallel it. Let's just jump right into our deals today. Let's talk about slavery.
Okay.
I imagine you would say slavery is evil. I hope so. At least that's what I understood from you per our conversations. You would not condone slavery, right?
No.
And if I were to ask you, is there ever a circumstance or a time in which slavery should be condoned? I imagine you would say no, just like you would say no to the question about the pornography.
Again, we're trying to define this based on a postmodern world in which we live in. I get it. I know what you're saying.
I'm not trying to define it in postmodern world. I'm asking you, is there ever a time in any circumstances, forget the postmodern world, any time where it would be okay to condone slavery?
Are you talking about like what we in America did here to the African American population, where
no, I'm talking about what Israel was doing to the nations surrounding them.
The things that God was punishing them for?
No, the things that he was condoning and telling them how to do properly.
So in the regard to that, is it the same definition of slavery that you have for what the Americans did here?
No.
Are you saying they're the same definition?
I'm not even worried about the Americans here. I'm just talking about strict chattel slavery in the Bible, where you could take slaves from the nations, bequeath them to your children for life, and they were never allowed to get out and be free.
They were punished for holding people for slavery.
No, they weren't.
That's why they were exiled, because of doing that.
No, Exodus 21, 20 through 21 says this.
Let me pull it up.
Oh no, let me get to a different text. Sorry, let me
Exodus
give you
what?
Let's start with Leviticus 25. Start with Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25, 44 through 46. This is the commands from God. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life.
What verse again, please?
That was Leviticus 25, 44 through 46.
44 through 36. Okay. So by looking at these texts, okay, so let's do you want to do a deep dive on that word? Or
Which word?
are we just gonna go with the English? This is what it means in English. Or are we gonna look into what this word actually means here?
Which word?
Let's look at slaves.
Okay.
Give me just a second.
So my understanding of a slave is when you own somebody. That's slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much exactly what the text says they were able to do. So, I mean, regardless of what the word is or whatever at the bottom, the end of it, slave could be translated bakumika. I don't care. The point is, God is telling them, take these people and own them, and then give them to your children for life.
Mm-hmm.
That's slavery.
Okay, so what you're saying here, sorry, I'm looking at this. I wasn't ready for this part. All right, so a person bound to another in service, usually due to debt or poverty, but not chattel property in the modern sense. That's what I'm reading as the definition. A person bound to another in service, usually due to debt or poverty, but not chattel property in the modern sense. So it seems like these are people that are not able to take care of themselves post this war, and therefore they are being charged to take care of them. It's not that they're brutalizing them and making them like the way that we think in terms of property. It seems to be that this is not chattel slavery.
Well, that's odd because in Exodus 21, 20 through 21, here is how God instructs them to take care of their slaves when they're disobedient. Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. So that sounds an awful lot like chattel slavery.
Tell me that verse again.
That's Exodus 21,
Mhm.
20 through 21.
Okay. Exodus 21,
So
20
you have the
20.
combination of bequeathing them for life. They have no out. They don't even get to follow the Jubilee laws. These people are captured from the nations. They're enslaved for life, and you can beat them as long as they don't die within 3 days. You're good,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the
Yeah.
instruction.
Mm-hmm. 20. Sorry, I'm trying to pull this up at the same
That's
time.
fine. That's fine.
All right. Exodus 20, verse what again?
20 to 21.
All right. Excuse me. All right. So let's see this here. All right. Whoops. Sorry if this is boring, folks, but I'm going to look at this. All right. So I keep saying this, that this is not, it says right here, it's not chattel slavery in the modern sense.
What says it's not chattel slavery? Who cares about the modern sense? What says it's not chattel slavery?
It's the ibed, a bond servant, a servant. Yeah,
And
if
and
if
what
he in, if he inflicts capital punishment, which is avenge, if he inflicts capital punishment, then likely executed. He is his money, economic liability in the ancient context. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm trying to do this simultaneously as we talk.
I mean, it's fine. It's just in what sense, in what world do you think it is okay to own somebody, regardless of the reason, and that you can beat them as long as they don't die within 3 days? Give me any circumstance where you think that that is appropriate.
All right. So, do you remember how I was talking to you about the mediator of a covenant? Do you remember me talking about that?
I mean, not specifically. What are you referring to?
Okay. So, whenever these words, for example, that we find in the first 5 books, the Torah or the Pentateuch, whichever way you go, the important thing to remember is that God is working with fallen humanity, and he is raising up a particular person to begin to operate his covenant with his people, the people that he selected out of this group, right? Out of this, if we take the whole, all right? So let me try to define the matrix here really quick, and then I'll get back to this. So when you enter into the knowledge of good and evil world, what we would call fallen humanity inside Christianity, these are people that they've done only evil continually, which eventually God will wipe out, or they are operating based off of this idea, this moral autonomy. Okay. It's obvious, if we're going to use the Bible, if you're going to use this as an objective standard, then you have to accept that there is a period of time, over time, that God is lifting up or bringing up particular people in particular time to deal with a particular thing. This was going on already within the ancient world in which he raised up this person, Moses or Aaron. This was already happening. The world was already doing this. Okay. So now God is coming to them and he is working through this mediator. But that many times what we learn in scripture is that these men that were lifted up by God, that they were operating off of their principles of who they were and where they come from in their time. You learn this by Jesus much later in the story. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, that's something that if you go to the Old Testament, if you go back to these early books, this is something that God said. That's what God said, right? But then they're talking amongst themselves and they're saying, well, Moses gave us this right of a certificate of a divorcement, right? And Jesus said, that's not what was meant in the beginning. My point is that mediating of a covenant also allows the culture from which it's being pulled from to be operated within. So just because he's saying something in regard to slavery or servanthood or avenging or whatever's happening, these are things that are already occurring. It's already happening.
All right, so let me ask you something. Okay. Were children dishonoring their parents already in that culture?
Children dishonoring their parents?
Yes.
I would say that, wouldn't you say everybody's had kids that dishonor their parents?
Sure, and yet God didn't have any problem making one of the 10 commandments, honor your father and mother. Mm-hmm. Was there coveting going on? Sure. God had no problem making a commandment against that. Were people not keeping the Sabbath? Yes, obviously. And yet God had no problem making commandment. He also had no problem protecting shrimp and pigs and all kinds of things that you weren't allowed to eat. But God couldn't come in and say, thou shalt not have slaves, because it was happening already in that culture. That doesn't add up, man.
Well, he can do whatever he wants within the particular time frame.
But now you're justifying God because you have to defend him at all costs.
I'm not defending him at all costs. I'm giving you exactly what I told you I was going to give you. The God in the Matrix over time.
But again, why doesn't God do the same thing with slavery that he did with honoring your parents, not keeping the Sabbath, and coveting and murder and stealing? He had no problem making commandments against those. Why not slavery?
I mean, I can't answer that question. I don't know. I don't know why he did it this way.
Could it be because he's immoral and doesn't exist?
I don't have to jump that far.
So the progressive revelation, this is what you're going with, and he's working with them. Here's another problem with that. Let's just say I'm an Israelite and I happen to have advanced far beyond everybody else, and I live in Israel and under the law of God, and I actually think slavery is immoral, and I don't want slaves, and I also think it's immoral to beat anybody. like this to the point of death, but as long as they don't die. And let's say I've advanced to that point. But God's command says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take slaves from these nations. I want you to bequeath them to your children. And here's how I want you to beat them properly. And he's given these laws. I now have to actually go against my moral standard. And I have to backtrack and obey God's law now, because God's law hasn't said very clearly, slavery is evil, don't have slaves. But you're arguing that, well, I don't know why God would do this. He just decided that slavery is okay, and we shouldn't say anything negative against it because, well, he was just working with the time. That doesn't compute, man.
It does for me. It computes for me,
How?
Alan.
How come it computes? And then you argued the New Testament. Where in the New Testament did Jesus once condemn slavery? How come he never said, you heard that it was said, you can beat your slaves and bequeath them to your children, but I say to you, never once do we hear Jesus teach anything against slavery. You know what I think instead Jesus does is he has slaves for life. He actually has people saying, I am a slave of Jesus. I am a servant of Jesus. Jesus not only doesn't condemn slavery, but he embraces it and now has slaves for all eternity. And there's nothing in the New Testament that remotely teaches anything different about this term of slave in the New Testament, the Old Testament. That's Christian modernization, trying to bring into the text something that's not there to try to defend Jesus and make slavery something that's okay. But there's nothing of that sort that teaches a distinction between the slavery of the old and the slavery that people are like James are saying they're a slave of Jesus. Like Jesus is absolutely not condemning slavery. He is condoning it. And not only that, he teaches that the whole point of the old covenant, the whole point of the law and prophets was to teach love.
So what do you do with the verses like when the Son of God sets you free indeed? Is that being set free, or is that still slavery?
It's being set free according to that passage. It's being set free from your bondage to sin. For what purpose? It actually says in the same text so that you can become a slave of Christ.
So in order to use slavery the way that we're defining it now, is that if this is love, then you become a slave to love. Is that true?
No, what I'm suggesting is that if that is in fact what the point of the law was, is to teach love, that is the worst kind of love I've ever seen in my life. God's command of the old covenant to endorse and improve slavery in such a way that he couldn't just stop it. He had to make it a better form of slavery. I mean, that's like, well, all the other nations, they beat their wives and they beat them every day. I'm only going to let you beat your wife 3 times a week because that's just what our culture does. And so I'm going to improve on it a little bit. And because time's moving, we're just going to defile women just a little bit longer, guys, because I have to do this mediation thing. So maybe in like 3 generations, I'll lessen it to two days of beating your wives, and you're only allowed to use the backhand. You can't use your fist anymore. I mean, this is the absurdity of what you're suggesting here with God not condemning slavery and just putting an end to it in any time period and under any circumstance. And then Jesus coming on the scene and not once condemning it, but saying that this is what love looks like, being a slave.
He didn't say that.
But that's the point. He said, this is what the law teaches. It is love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Upon the whole law and the prophets, these commandments depend on. So the whole idea of love is the same principle that the whole gospel teaches: is you're a worthless sinner, you're horrible, submit or else. And that's exactly what the gospel is. But you have to paint it in a kind and gentle way. You have to use tact and say, well, he's not really saying become my slave or else. But that's essentially what he's saying. And that is the law of love according to the biblical gospel. So that is what I see going on. This is how God loves. He doesn't condemn anything evil. He only condones it and approves how to do it more properly.
So if you're okay, he's not, Jesus is not endorsing slavery in that regard. That's not how it's being framed. If anything, he's made himself a servant to everyone and to everything, including you, everyone. He becomes the servant.
Only for a time, but then he fulfills his job. He becomes king now, and now everybody has to submit to him. This is Paul in Acts chapter 27.
Yeah, but the way that you're framing it as if he's like this evil, wicked king that now everybody must submit. No,
He
that's not what
is. That's exactly what I see in the
so
Bible. Yes.
how do the nations then bring the glory into the kingdom? That it's not about slavery. It's not about that. God interjecting in particular times through particular people over time, he's dealing with the ultimate, which is the evil, which is why they weren't allowed to be with him and relate with him before. That's why they couldn't be with him and live forever in that initial state. Because the evil that we're talking about, we talk about slavery. Let's talk about the worst possible case scenario of any kind of evil. Take it to the nth, go as far as you want. This is what the penalty that is going to be laid upon Christ. He's going to be that is going to be penalized to him. And we say, well, that's just for a short period of time. Well, if you think about where he's coming from, he's the one that evidently is enacting all of this. If we're going to link him to Yahweh, so he's going to put all that punishment upon himself. He punishes himself for it all.
According to the text, for the slavery of sin, which ironically, if you go back to the garden, that slavery was put upon mankind because of God too.
What are you talking about?
So you go back to, so this is what isn't the slavery you're talking about that Jesus redeemed man from, supposedly, was the slavery that was put into place in the garden. The slavery to sin and death, right?
What is that? Yeah, exactly. And what is that?
So here's the thing.
So the law starts defining it in this to the nth degree, like defining it as a temporary thing, telling you what it is, showing you what it is.
Yeah, and that's fine and good, but why is man even put into that position to begin with?
Because liberty.
Liberty what?
Liberty is why man was put in the position in the first place. You cannot have love without liberty. I've said this, I will say it till I go to my dying day to any Christian alive. In the garden, Adam and Eve were free. They were at liberty. In order to be at liberty. So when he said, do not do this, do not take all of this on you, because once you do, on the day that you eat of it, you're going to die. And they did that thing. So now they've become a slave to their own moral autonomy. They have the total capacity to forget about relating to him and letting him reveal himself to them in life. Now they're going to make their own decisions and they're going to develop it, which is what we all do. We all do it now. You do it, I do it, everybody does it.
Did Adam and Eve have the knowledge of good and evil before they ate the fruit?
No.
So how in the world did Adam and Eve know whether eating that fruit was good or evil?
Because they knew one thing. They relate to him, and that tree is not good for food. That's what they know.
How do they know what good is?
Because he told them what it was.
But how do they know? But how do they know that obeying God is a good thing versus disobeying God if they don't have the knowledge of good and evil?
Precisely, which is exactly what Satan asked them.
Wait,
that's exactly what he asked them.
And Satan told the truth, and God lied because they didn't die in the day they ate, and that's what God said would happen.
They did die in the day that they ate.
Right, because you take the spiritual position, which obviously that's the only position you can take.
No, there's other positions. You can go with the 1,000-year position if you want, which is what all the Jewish rabbis went with. So and then he died at 930.
Yeah, no, sure, and that's not in a day. But the point is you can't argue that Adam and Eve knew that it was wrong to do this if they did not have the knowledge of wrong yet.
You can argue this. If you are told, do not, of all the things you can have, you're totally at liberty to have everything but this one thing, because on the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. Satan tells these half-truths and total truths by saying he knows that the moment that you eat it, you'll be like him. You're going to be like him. You're going to know both good and evil, which he does. And then he says, and your eyes will be opened. Well, Eve's eyes were already pre-opened a little bit because she looked at a tree that she didn't think that was desirable for fruit, for wisdom, and now suddenly sees it because of the deception of the devil. If I was going to argue anything, if I'm as a non-Christian, I'd want to know why that serpent was in the garden in the first place. Why is he even there? Like, this is a setup, like that's how I would look at it.
Do you think it's okay to condemn somebody for doing something prior to having the knowledge of good and evil?
That was the part of the relationship that they had with God in their initial creation.
That's I asked a specific
Yes.
question. So you
Yes.
okay? So you have a baby, and you tell the baby, "Don't throw up on your shirt, or I will put you in the basement for the rest of your life." And the baby throws up on their shirt. They have no knowledge of good and evil, no ability to know whether it's right or wrong, and yet you would say that it's okay to put that baby in the basement for the rest of its life.
That is not, man, that's not even what we're talking about here. It's not even the same thing.
We're
It's not
talking
even the
Adam,
same thing.
Adam and Eve were they were just put in the they have no
No,
knowledge of
we're
good and evil.
talking
They know
about
nothing.
covenant. We're talking about covenant, man. We're not talking about putting my own child in a basement. We're talking about what it means to be in covenant with God and to be in relationship with God and how to live according to that.
I know, but the point is, how do you know what is the right and wrong way to live in this covenant if you do not have the knowledge of good and evil?
Because you are just living in relationship with him. You don't need to have all of that other stuff. You don't
But how
need
do
it.
you know that the best way to do this relationship is to actually go against what God says if you don't know that it's wrong?
Because again, which is going to force me into this defense of God, because God knows.
Because
That's the
God,
story.
but God knows, but Adam didn't, and so Adam gets punished for something God knows, but Adam doesn't.
It was a willingness. It was a willingness on Adam's part to maintain his relationship with his wife. That's what he did. He maintained his relationship with his wife. He was lonely and
Which
God
sounded,
fixed it.
which probably sounded like the best option because he doesn't know that that's wrong. He doesn't have the knowledge of good and evil.
By in order to say at that point, Adam looking at the situation in the relationship with God that he was in, he could have went, perhaps as a willing sacrifice for her at the time to redeem her. I don't know. It's not written there, man. It comes later.
It's
It
not. The
comes much
only point
later.
I'm making is that Adam and Eve were put into slavery to sin, not because of something that they did knowingly was sinful, because they couldn't possibly know that if they didn't have the knowledge of good and evil. They were put in it because, as you said, God knows. And so God simply enslaved two people for doing something that they couldn't have possibly known was wrong. And they got condemned for that. And the whole human race gets punished for these two people.
Yeah, the whole idea is the breaking of the fellowship, the breaking of the relationship. That's all that they needed to know. That's all he told them. That was it.
No, he said you will surely die. And
Don't do it.
And here's the thing: how do you even know if death's not a bad thing if you don't have the knowledge? Like they know not. They're literally just thrown into this garden and they're like told these things. How can you possibly know that it's wrong to actually disobey God, or that death's even a bad thing? It might be a great thing. Who knows? How do you know these things?
I don't know. It's just, I mean, as
God
far as
knows. That's it. And so he enslaved them for no reason because he needed a plan and he needed to work with people and figure out a way to bring about slavery at some point that he couldn't condemn. He had to condone because that's just what people were doing at the time, even though he could condemn eating shrimp and disobeying parents, but not slavery. He had to hold on to that one. And then Jesus comes along, never once condemned it, but he puts an end to this, first problem with slavery that God enslaved Adam with, only so that then they can turn around and he can demand, as Paul says in Acts 27, that Christ will now demand that all people submit to him. That sounds like slavery. That's not a request, that's a demand. And so if you don't, you get punished forever. And if you do, you're his slave forever. Those are the two options. That is a do this or die.
that's such a hideous way of looking at it,
But it's
man.
the only proper way to look at it, dude. That is the text. That
It's
is
a
exactly what
hideous,
the biblical message is, man.
that is a hideous way to look at it, Alan. My goodness.
Okay. What other option is there? You explain to
Well,
me why it's okay to condone slavery in the Old Testament and bring it about where Jesus never once condemns it, actually brings about slaves of his own. And you tell me any other way to look at texts like he demands
Jesus,
your submission and go ahead.
Jesus, okay, by saying that Jesus didn't condemn slavery, Jesus knew that all men were already slaves to the knowledge of good and evil that was in him. He knew what was in them. He knew it. The whole point was that he was going to set them free from that and give them grace, to give them grace to overcome it.
Well, no, he
And
had
then
to.
and
Of
then
course, he
listen,
had
the
to.
whole
He had to because the only way to have him to make them slaves of his is to free them from that slavery.
no,
That's how
no,
it works. You can't be slaves of two people.
no, that's not that's not what's going on. That's not
Okay.
what's going on,
So
Alan.
why continue the theme of slavery in Christ?
By saying you're a slave to the Spirit.
No, you literally, James says, I am a slave of Christ. Peter
Okay.
says, I am a slave of Christ. Paul
Okay.
says, I am a slave of Christ.
hmm
They all call themselves slaves of Christ.
Okay. And that went to their deaths and told everybody that there was a way to receive the relationship with God by through him, that they could go through him and have a relationship with God and be set free. Set
From the
free.
other slavery. Correct.
Set free from the bondage of sin.
Yeah,
Set free. Which
correct.
is the experience that I've been trying to define, the things that are going on within me, the things that he wars with on my behalf for me. Those are the things, and then gives me the grace to overcome them and clothes me in his righteousness. I don't see why that would be seen as a chattel slavery, as a you are like this indentured servant. This is liberty. It is
No, indentured
liberty.
servitude. Like I've heard people try to define indentured servitude, like they try to make it sound like that's an employer-employee type relationship where you're just working for somebody and making money. That's not at all what's going on in these biblical texts, man. That is not indentured servitude. That is flat out chattel slavery, man. The fact that you are owned for life and can never get out, that's not indentured servitude, man. Nor is that employee-employer. That is chattel slavery.
Hmm. Which means that the person that takes them on for life has to be responsible for taking care of them forever.
It depends on how you define taken care of, because according to the
Well,
text you read in Exodus 21, you can beat the shit out of them if you don't like anything they do.
okay.
Well, I mean, you read the text. It says right there you can literally beat them as long as they don't die within 3 days.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tell you what I'll do for the next time. I will dig into those verses. Okay, I'll dig in with you. If that's what this is, if that's where we're heading. I feel like that we're raping the entire gospel here. I mean, it doesn't sound, your view of what you think Jesus did is so foreign to me. It's such a foreign idea, Alan.
I get it, because that
It's
is what
foreign.
we're taught to believe, because the gospel's supposed to be wonderful. But I'm here to tell you, if you take a step back and you look at the process of going on here, like it's interesting to me that you are willing to say there is never a time or a circumstance in which slavery would be okay. But then when God does it, you say, I don't know why he does it. I guess he has his good reasons.
Every
And,
single
and,
time
and
that
yet,
I see it, he's lessening what's going on in the culture at its
but that
time
doesn't
to
matter.
develop it. It does to me, and
It
it
doesn't matter
develops.
if there's ever a time in which he improves it. The fact that he did it and condoned it at all is the problem. You said that you think the morality of the Bible as a standard is good because it agrees with your morality. Your morality said there's never a circumstance or a time when slavery should be condoned. Then you go
Post
to the Bible and you approve God for this because God decided that it's okay in this time period.
No, sir. Post Christ. You've got to keep it in its time, Alan. Keep
That's
it in
not
its
post Christ.
time.
That's the Old Testament.
No, post Christ is the what I'm looking at it from my perspective is post Christ.
So you think there is a time and a circumstance in which slavery should be condoned?
God, I feel like I'm going in a circle here with you. This is in its particular time when God is revealing a certain aspect of his life to his people with surrounding nations. We haven't even discussed what's going on. Is this the Midianites and whatever they were doing? We're like, what? You've got to know the whole of the story. You can't just take this one little aspect of it and say, well, this is it. What's going on at that time when Leviticus 25 is being written? At that point, when he interjects into history, into human history at that particular time, what evil and what good is he dealing with, and what is he revealing of himself to bring them and point them towards the ultimate goal, which will be in Christ?
All right, so let's try to change this then and try to make this a little bit more clear. Do you think there's ever a time or a circumstance, even in the Old Covenant, pre-Christ, where pedophilia is a good thing that God should condone?
No.
Wow. Okay.
I understand. I'm telling you.
Then let's go to the Old Testament and see how God approves this and actually instructs them on what to do with little girls.
All right,
Because
show me.
you may not have ever seen this. Numbers 31.
All right.
and starting in verse 1, and we're not going to read the whole thing. You can read it later, but it's a whole lot of verses. But I just want to pick out the key verses here as we go through so I can show you the parallels going on here. So starting in Numbers 31, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, so this is the Lord, take vengeance on the Midianites for the Israelites. Great. So according to you, it depends on what's going on. So apparently, as long as you're taking vengeance on somebody and the Midianites did something wrong, then maybe it's okay for God to approve and condone pedophilia because they did something wrong and the little children should be punished for this.
Mhm.
Jump to verse 7. They fought against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses and killed every man. Verse 14. Moses was angry with the officers of the army who returned from the battle. Have you allowed all the women to live? He asked them. Verse 17. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man. But save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. So you got a comparison here between man and woman and boys and girls. Kill the man, kill the boys, kill the women, but save the little girls. What do you think they were good for, huh?
Are you asking me? You
Yeah.
meaning like sexual exploitation? Is that where you're heading
I
in your
mean, what
brain?
other use do these little girls have that the boys and the women and the men do not have? Specifically, the women who have been with a man.
Well, to automatically assume that it's for sexual exploitation is what you're doing right now, right? Is that
Well,
what you're saying?
give me another reason to save only little girls.
Well, girls don't grow up to be warriors. That's one. They don't grow up. They don't
But
grow up to
the
become
women
warriors
aren't
that fight
warriors.
them.
The women aren't warriors either. So why kill them?
What are you talking about? What do you mean?
It said kill the women. Why kill the women and just save the little girls? The women aren't warriors. Why kill them?
That's a good point. That is a really good point.
You can try to think of every other reason, but I'm telling you, bro, you're going to eliminate all of them because there's only one reason that the girls would be safe and not that they're useful for one thing that boys and women who have been with a man and men are not useful for.
Hmm. So you think that they're being saved to be used for sexual exploitation? It's not saying it, but we're assuming it basically.
Yes, very much so. Yes, because there's no other. You just use deductive reasoning. There's no other reason for this.
Hmm. So is there a? So I wonder if this is like. So you think they're keeping them for basically for marriage for themselves later?
Precisely. And remember, women in that culture, apparently, since God didn't like to work against the culture and just let things happen as they happen, these girls were ready for marriage at the ripe young age of 12 years old.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean that was definitely common in that time, right?
Yeah, although I think our morality has improved tremendously, and as you would say, post Christ, now here we are, and I would say, is there ever a time when, or a period, or a circumstance in which 12-year-old girls should be given to men to exploit and just force them to marry them? I would say no. And I would imagine that because God is omniscient and knows what we would figure out in our day, that he could have just as well figured that out and protected these little girls. But he couldn't seem to do that because, well, God has his reasons.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great argument.
Shall we
It's a
do
great.
rape and murder too? Because they're there as well.
I mean, I say we go through all of them. Like I guess it's hour 25 minutes. I have to stop, but this has been this is good. No, this is good. All right. Well, that was good, Alan.
Well, good. I appreciate that. And I hope that you think about these things because, man, I'm telling you, like, we were so we're just inundated with seeing the Bible only one way because we don't ever take a step back and say, what else could this mean? This is some crazy stuff, man.
The thing that got me is something I didn't see before was why did he kill the women?
Exactly.
Is it because they're too old and now because they're already ingrained with what's going on? Like that's horrible. So is
It,
he
it doesn't even say that. It doesn't even give an age. It
yeah,
just
it
says
just
who hasn't been with a man. So they're literally taking virgins
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty brutal. I'll go
And
back and read those.
let me remind you, this was not just Moses. Remember, God came to Moses and said. I
Hmm.
wanted to make sure I read that part to you because that's like,
No, and I understand that. And that's, again, that's another side of this that's been difficult for me to understand, because I wrestle with the things that Jesus says in regard to like that certificate of divorcement. The thing I don't understand is that the Pharisees as well as Jesus say that, well, Moses gave us this, but if you go back and you read it, it doesn't say Moses gave it to him. It was God that did it. So it's
correct.
kind of, so it made me wonder, like, okay, so what exactly is this mediator doing? Like, is this Moses that's writing this stuff down? Like, is this what's going on? And he's saying it's from the Lord and God's allowing that? Like that's weird. It's
Look,
weird.
as often as Moses and God would talk as friends face to face, even though that is a strange contradiction to not being able to see God face to face, but whatever. I found a way around it in my book, which is ironically one of the chapters that helped me get out of Christianity, my own material. But here's Moses, and he's interacting with God, and God. You would think that everything Moses is bringing out is because God is instructing him. This is what we're supposed to understand from the text. I mean, Moses is not running off on his own doing his own thing. I mean, otherwise, you think God would have waited till he hit a rock to punish him? He'd have probably punished him a lot earlier for giving commands against his will. But he
Hmm.
didn't, because he's following God's orders until he hits the rock, and then he's like, well, that was one thing too many, and he's done with him. I mean, it's such, some of these texts are so strange, man. And once you see the pedophilia one there, and you look at the rape and the murder one, you start comparing all of them. I'm telling you, you're going to see the slavery one the same way. It's just like it's all there, man. It's just, and it's sick, and it's very frustrating, man, because we've all been blinded to it, man, for so long. But it is not as beautiful of a gospel as you think it is, man. It's just not.
Well, I certainly don't like what I just read in Numbers. I don't like that. I didn't like before. I thought that they were, what I thought was going on was that they were, obviously killing the warriors, which was very normal for tribal warfare, regardless of God or whatever. Just that was a normal thing. But the saving of the young virgins and what the purpose of that would be if that's going to be wives. So if the brain automatically goes to sexual exploitation. It just, I don't, it
Of
doesn't
course,
say anything else. It doesn't say anything else there. It doesn't
no.
say, it doesn't say, and keep them and then make them your queen of your tribe and worship them. And like, it doesn't say any of that stuff. It seems like it's left open for the mind, which is you can do whatever you want with these girls.
And look, if you visit that culture, and I know you know much about it, what benefit would there be to a young girl in any other way that would not be better served by either boys, women, or men? They served one function, dude. That's
Hmm.
the only possible conclusion you can draw from that passage.
Hmm. Which is bizarre, though, if you think about it from the covenant aspect, because so I guess they were exploiting these young women and not taking care of the kids either, because they weren't supposed to be having relations with these women outside of the covenant people, right?
Say that again.
Ultimately, they weren't supposed to be having relations with women outside of the covenant people, right? They weren't supposed to be birthing children outside of it.
Well, actually, that's not the case. If you look at some of the other stories of war, they were allowed to kill everything but the women, and they just took the
Hmm.
women for themselves, and literally says to use them. We won't take the time to look at the text. We'll do this next time. There's a text that actually says, take these women, shave their head after, what is it, 14 days or however much time, let them mourn for their fathers that they lost or whatever, and then after that, take them, use them, see what you like them, test drive them basically, and if you don't
Hmm.
like them, then you can get rid of them, but you can't keep them as slaves. You get rid of them because you've already basically like to follow them. But literally, God's instructing them: take these women, use them up, enjoy them. If you don't like them, get rid of them. If you like them, then you have them for life. This stuff's sick, man. It's all there. I'm telling you,
Yeah,
man.
I don't like that Numbers 31. I'm having some cognitive dissonance right now.
Sure. We'll compare that then with Ezekiel chapter 16, where God looks at Israel when she is young and ripe for age. She just basically came out of menstrual period. She just for the first time has her period. He basically says, read through it, and he's like lusting after her and talking about how much he desires her. Remember, in that culture, we're talking about a 12-year-old girl, probably 13, maybe at the latest. And
Hmm.
he's literally discussing how she's in her prime and just had her first period. and he's all talking about all this erotic language about Israel in that age. And I'm just like, what is this, man?
Ezekiel 16, you said?
Yeah, Ezekiel 16.
I'll write this down. I want to be ready for that next week.
Yeah.
Not ready as in I'm not saying I'm going to be ready to fight you.
No, I know
I'm
what you
going
mean.
to I mean, I'm going to read this and be honest with you. I don't like what I just read in Numbers 31.
Sure.
I don't like it.
So you start piggybacking these things, and then you realize, I wonder why God chose a young virgin to produce Jesus. I mean, it's just weird. The Holy Spirit comes upon her, and it's just the whole thing is bizarre. Look, it's and it's fine. Like, okay, God chose her, and she's supposed to be special, and that's great, and she feels privileged because at a 12-year-old age she gets to produce the Messiah. But bro, would you as a father be happy that God came and chose your 12-year-old to impregnate? That shit's weird, man.
Not now.
Not now, not ever.
Not
Dude,
now,
that's
yeah.
just weird, man. But we accept it because the Bible says it's. Hey, dude, you got to think about this stuff, man.
Well, can I tell you something else?
Yeah.
So I'm getting ready to. I'm going to plug my Patreon, but I just want you to know I'm getting ready to do a series on. It's called "Burned at the Stake," the murder of Michael Servetus, and it's the guy that John Calvin didn't like because the guy wrote a book against what Calvin wrote, and he redlined his own book and stuff, and eventually he was burned at the stake, in Geneva for it. And because I titled it "The Murder of Michael Servetus," I've had numerous Christians send me private messages and then messages on Facebook and stuff saying it's not murder, you need to stop, quit saying this, and I'm like, yes, it is. Like, it is absolutely murder. This was an argument. Well, you weren't alive in that time. And I'm like, okay, I know that argument because that's something that I think and I get it. But even as a product of their time in the 1500s, they have the same Bible that we have. And we know what murder is and how it works. And so had you ever heard this story whenever you were in the Reformed position? So you don't know the story of Michael Servetus?
No.
Dude, John Calvin had him burned at the stake.
Wow.
John Calvin. And I'm like, uh-oh. So like, I'm doing.
Actually, you know what? It's starting to ring. I have heard of it. Yes, it's starting to ring a bell, but I don't recall it at all.
The only reason I'm bringing it up is because it was the question of, is it murder or not? And I can't see it any other way. To me, it is absolutely murder.
Of course it's murder.
They were wrong. They were burning people alive for not agreeing with what they believed in. They had control. It was an abuse of power.
Dude, and so is every circumstance in the Old Testament where Israel conquers a nation and they submit to Israel because they've lost, and God says, kill them anyway. That's murder, dude. You wave the white flag and you get killed anyway?
Yeah.
Bro, that's some sick stuff. And forget the fact that the girls were chosen, these little girls. Why kill the women and boys? What do you stand to gain by this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it in modern times, the way that our brains think in modern, you can look like when we look at the Islamic Caliphate of today that train up these young boys to be these, terrorists, right? And you can see how they're being indoctrinated. So you can almost in your mind, you could say, well, I can see, I'm not saying it's awesome, but you can at least see why the young boys, why they would try to eliminate it, much like the Egyptians did to the Israelites. They killed every boy under the age of 2 or whatever, those ideas because of war. But dude, saving the girls, like that leads so much to the mind of what they're going to do with those girls.
Yeah, but
like,
even
I don't like that.
Think about the boys too, though. Think about this, man. Based upon what you just said, why would you not save them then? Because they're just boys. They haven't been indoctrinated yet. You can actually indoctrinate them as Israelites.
Yeah, you could raise them
to be your own warriors.
You could raise them to protect them because you took them in and you loved them and fed them and kept them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
now,
I see it.
Think about this. In every one of these circumstances, Jesus is Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one giving all these commands, man, and never once retrofits them in the New Testament. He never changes. He just lets them go.
The thing about slavery is something that I have never thought about either. I can't do it all live and in color here right now, but it's definitely something I'm going to do this next week until we get back to each other next week.
No, that sounds great. Well, listen, I know you got to go, but let me, I promised people question time, so I don't really see any.
No.
I don't really see any, but I just want to scroll through this.
Has
I see
anybody been watching?
yeah, we had a few. Yeah, we had a few viewers. It's been nice. Um, I don't see. I see more comments, but if you do have a question, you got about 30 seconds. Throw it in here so Rick and I can answer your questions.
I can give it a few more minutes if you need to.
We got some comments, but nothing. Mushroom, whoever you are, thanks for commenting and being part of this. It's been nice seeing you interact with us. Let's see. Here's one question from him, I guess, if you can. Is morality based off of the covenants? Why were some covenants more evil than others? Could it be people doing their own thing and saying it was God? I guess that's a question for you.
I mean, is morality based off of the covenant? I define morality as the knowledge of good and evil, like the way that we think about knowledge of good and evil. The covenant was something that is an agreement between man and God. So the question of why were some covenants more evil than others, I don't know what that means. What does he mean by that? Can you help me with that there, Alan?
I actually am not sure what he means, to be honest with you.
Could it be people doing their own thing and saying it was God? I mean, that would be the
That's
that would be your position,
yeah. Well,
actually,
we do
Alan.
that today, so yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
As far as covenants are concerned, I don't think you wouldn't think of a covenant as evil per se.
yeah.
Um, so I don't think morality is based off of the covenant. I think morality is the effect of the knowledge of good and evil. Covenants are something that man enters into with God, and that's how you would define it. Otherwise, you follow Alan's position, which is it's just a thing they made up, and they're just saying that God said it.
All right. Here's an interesting one. Um, God was upset when Cain killed Abel, but condones stoning later on in the future. Why? Um, before you attempt to answer that, I will just say this is also a very, very interesting and hot topic for me. Stoning, bro. Like, if you just take a step back, because I think most of the time when you're a Christian, you don't, and I don't just mean you, like Christians in general. Even when I was a Christian, you don't take the time to really like digest the depth of the stories going on.
Right.
Like the flood, for example. It's just that was a beautiful story. People died. He made a rainbow. Great. You don't imagine all the babies drowning, and the mothers trying their best to say like the six visuals of what God's doing here in this story. It's absolutely morbid. Um, and I think a lot of times we just talk about stoning and just in passing. Oh, and he was stoned to death, and you just move on. Do you know what like stoning is? Like, bro, if you think about it, like you were glad when a stone hit you in the head and killed you finally because it was nothing but battering your bones and breaking your skin over and over and over and over again until you got lucky enough to be killed. Like, that is sick. And this is what supposedly the God of mercy thought was a great way to punish people. It's like you think of it on this side and you're just like, what was I thinking? How did I even think this was okay? This is not okay.
Well, I think you just defined it very well, actually, is that because this is one of the things that I do in the burrows too, is that we try to stop and sit in these things for a minute. Have we ever, as the burrows, ever sat down and thought what it would be like to sit and watch somebody get stoned for 2 hours? Just sitting there watching them getting stoned, like watching them have rocks pummeled at them until they die.
I would throw up, honestly. Like
Oh
I'm just
yeah, I mean,
imagining it. There's no way I could stomach that. I would literally barf,
and I
probably
think
pass out.
Christians, what we do is we go to the one story where stoning comes up with Jesus. He was without sin cast the first stone, John chapter 8, which some people even argue whether it should be in the Bible or not. But we think of that, and I think because we think of that in the way that Jesus looked at it then we try to, I think we separate in our brains. Well, that's not why Jesus, because technically speaking, if that woman really was caught in the act of adultery, then she and the other man should have been stoned. They should have been, according to the law. So why all of a sudden the change? Why is Jesus changing it all of a sudden? It's kind of an interesting thought.
Oh, it is. Well, I mean, who knows? Maybe Jesus was the other man. Guess we'll never know.
Oh, geez. You're pushing it. You're pushing it hard.
I sure am. Here's another question. Well, actually, I don't know that we answered that one specifically. Did you want to take a stab at that or just move on?
I mean, so God was upset when Cain killed Abel. Yes. He was. He heard the blood crying out from the ground. What is it that you've done? Then he curses him, and they cast him out to the east, and he goes to the land of Nod, but condones stoning later on in the future. Why? Because people who did certain aspects against what he deemed for his covenant people, that was the punishment. He told them, stone him till death. So if you're asking me why, I don't know why God was upset when Cain killed Abel, but then condoned stoning later. I don't know.
Okay. I would have preferred that God never condoned it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Mushroom asks again, is it God's design to make things that upset him or covenants that allow people to do things that upset him? Why does God want to be upset? Good question,
I
actually.
understand. Yeah, I understand why you're asking that question. I mean, it would certainly seem so. I know it's kind of bizarre to say that, but when you set up a garden and you allow the enemy of it to walk around to tempt the people that you have, it certainly feels like he's wanting to be upset about it eventually. It feels that way sometimes. I get it. I know why
Yeah,
you're asking that question.
I think it's an honest question. I appreciate that. And no more questions, but I love this last comment from one of our favorites, Rick, Homemaker Calling. Lily, thank you, Rick, for your honesty. Great talk. I
Mm.
agree. I always agree with that, Rick. You are one of the best, man. Very, very few are willing to dialogue the way you do. So I think it's awesome. And, in spite of the difficult conversation, theoretically, we're still friends.
More than theoretically, we're friends. Look, Alan, listen, and I'll say this to anybody that's listening to this. I'll say it to you too. You pointing that out in Numbers 31 is not because you're trying to ruin my life. You're seeing something and you think that I'm going to agree with you. And as of right now, I do. I don't like what I'm seeing in Numbers 31 right now. I don't like it. You're not doing it because you're mean. You're not trying to be the best. You're not trying to better me. You're trying to get me to see something. I know that's your heart. That's one of the reasons why I care about you. But I'm going to have to dig in and look at this.
Sure. So we'll leave it at that then. And we will return next week. Do you want to do 2 or 3 next week, Rick?
Oh, I don't care. You can pick either one. It's fine.
So next Sunday at 5 is the debate between Tristan and Don Preston. Tristan Gabriel and Don Preston.
Yeah, I
That's
can't believe that's finally happening.
That's finally happening. It's next week. So we're going to be the pre-debate to the main show. So we're like the opening band. So I encourage you all to come back and check out the opening band because we're going to warm you up for Tristan and Don. That's going to be taking place over on Myth Vision. So
Okay.
I would encourage you all to make sure you go over there and subscribe to that and do the notification because that's going to be a fun debate. But please join us back here next week.
Is Derek moderating that?
Derek is moderating that. Yep.
Is he really?
Yep.
Well, good.
Yeah, it's gonna
Derek,
be
I hope you do better. I hope you do better this time than you did the last time with the other guy. It's terrible.
Oh, you mean William Carrier? I mean,
not Richard Carrier. It was somebody else. It was some other guy with Don Preston and he was the moderator, and that guy was just brutal. Like he was personally attacking Don Preston, and I thought, come on, like get control of yourself. And so I sent a message to Derek and was like, dude, you should, but whatever. You know how Don is. He's a consummate professional and a nice guy, but at the same time, you'll stick it in your side here and there.
Fortunately, I both Tristan and Don are gentlemen, and I think they're going to respect each other. And I don't suspect we're going to have any issues like that. So it'll be a fun debate.
Yeah, it'd be fun to watch.
I think it'll be they're both very, very much gentlemen and scholars. So it's going to be nice to watch. I think it'll be a very, very pleasant debate. So let's do 3 then, because that way that'll limit us to about this time again, and then people can take a break real quick, grab something to drink, and then join over at the other debate.
Yeah, man.
Sounds like a plan, Rick. Thank you, buddy. It's been fun.
Yeah, man.
Everybody, thanks for watching. We will see you next week. Actually, join me this Wednesday night. I'm actually interviewing my goodness gracious, my mind's drawing a blank right this second. Foe from Dragons and Genesis. Jason Foe. I couldn't think of his name for a second. It's going to be a fun interview. He also deals with myths and shows how the biblical texts are pulling from all the other myths. So that'll be a fun conversation. So joining me this Tuesday, did I say Wednesday? This Tuesday night at 5 p.m. for Jason Foe. That'll be fun. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Have a great night, everybody.